أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. So as you know, I think the majority of you know that a couple of days ago we had the martyrdom anniversary, the death anniversary of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, the fourth of our Imams, the son of Imam Husayn alayhi salam, the father of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. And in the past, here and there, I think we have talked a little bit about his life. And in the time that we have, I didn't want to do a full lecture on Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, Zayn al-Abideen, except that I found this narration going through his life that I thought might be worth sharing and just highlighting 2 or 3 points from it. But I leave it to you. I think it's something rich enough that we can think about and come back to from time to time as a narration. So before I read the hadith to you, I thought I'd give you just a little bit of context so that you can situate this hadith and the type of setting in which the Imam would have said this. Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, so obviously he lived after Imam Husayn alayhi salam, so in the aftermath of Karbala, the dynasty of Bani Umayyad were going to their height, their strength, very and increasingly ruthless, bloodthirsty, and they went from right after Yazid, very quickly it went to Bani Marwan. So they continued. They are a branch of Bani Umayyad, and this continued for a while until the Umayyad dynasty basically crumbled under the pressure of its own internal issues, external issues, their incompetence, their greed, their thirst for blood, even within their own empire. And so it was inevitable that they would collapse, but this was seized as an opportunity by Bani al-Abbas, who came to power under the guise that they were the ones who were going to reestablish justice, and they were a lot more bloodthirsty than Bani Umayyad. Okay, so Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam lived at the right after Karbala. Imam Husayn alayhi salam is martyred, and he lives. By the time he passes away, Bani Umayyad are still in power. If you remember when we talked about Imam al-Baqir, they are still in power, and then in the life of Imam al-Baqir and really in the life of Imam al-Sadiq, this is when the Umayyad dynasty starts getting very weak, and then they completely crumble, and Bani al-Abbas in the life of Imam al-Sadiq come to power officially. So we're still very much away from that. We're still very much in the height of Bani Umayyad's rule and strength. And during that time, a lot of people, unfortunately, they present all of the uprisings that happened against the rulers of that time, of Bani Umayyad, as being, domino effect from Karbala, as though they were all good. There are people who want to paint everything with the same brush, and that's not the case at all. There are a lot of very good uprisings that happened. They were very much inspired by what happened to Imam Husayn alayhi salam. Inshallah, one day we'll talk about these, and we'll show the different streams of uprisings that happened after Karbala, to see the aftermath of Karbala. But there were certainly numerous uprisings, some of them directly linked with very good, very noble intentions, some of those related to Karbala. But there were also other uprisings, because there was so much injustice and there was so much violence against the people that when people would get fed up enough, they would just uprise against it, as having nothing to do with that Imam Husayn alayhi salam was killed, or that there's a great injustice being done. Not that. They were uprising because of poverty, because of social injustice, and so on and so forth. So we keep this in mind. We come to specifically Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam. In his time, as we said, a big number of revolts, uprisings happened. One of these specifically that I wanted to mention to you is something called Thawrat al-Tawabin. That's another one. Thawrat al-Qurraa. Tawabin, inshallah, one day we'll talk about it. And are they really Tawabin or it's something else? Thawrat al-Qurraa, the uprising of the Qurraa. In other words, the Qurraa, the reciters of the Qur'an. Long story short, Bani Umayyad put a man in charge, al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi, bloodthirsty ruler, who just grows in power. He's made governor. He sends one of his men on a expedition, a military expedition in Sijistan, in present-day Iran, Afghanistan, in that area. And it's a military expedition. They are actually victorious, the army that he sends under Ibn al-Ash'ath. And then he decides, the captain, the commander, he decides that they've fought long and hard enough. They should take a rest. Some of them should go back to their families and then, replenish, resource themselves and go on to battle again. Al-Hajjaj was completely against that. He wrote to the Hajjaj. The Hajjaj wrote back. He told him, basically he took it as an insult. He told him, no, you shall continue fighting as I ordered you. The army turned against Al-Hajjaj and they came back. This Ibn al-Ash'ath started going to all the prominent figures, and everybody has been hurt by Al-Hajjaj because Al-Hajjaj, is, not equally, but he is so bloodthirsty and so violent and so unjust towards society in general that everyone wants a peace, that everybody wants to uprise against him. He went to Iraq eventually, yes, and this is in Iraq when he was in Iraq. He was in Medina and he was moved. So they come back and it starts a whole series of a whole huge campaign. So among the people who join this specific group are the Qurraa and also the Fuqaha and also the Ulama, because it's just amassing more and more people, more and more fans who are willing to fight Al-Hajjaj. Is it because all of these people are in agreement? No. They're only in agreement that this is an enemy that we want to get rid of. This is a ruthless killer and an unjust ruler that we want to get rid of. But in any case, this happens and it lasts between 3 and 4 years. There's 80 battles that happen during that time. And then everything is done and history moves on. Okay? And that uprising is squashed completely and that's it. You fast forward in the writing of history, and then you see that there are a lot of people who are trying to associate this specific movement to Imam Sajjad, saying that the Imam Sajjad was the one who was secretly leading this entire movement against Hajjaj and against Bani Umayyad. So I thought I'd share it with you in case one day you hear about all of this. This appears only in the 7th century, specifically in the writings of the Zaydis. Zaydis are a group, a faction in Islam, who have a specific belief. They are considered a subgroup of the Shia, but they don't agree that the Shia usually believe in the 12 Imams, the 12ers, as they call them, the Ithna Ashariya. The Zaydis stop. They stop where? At Zayd. Zayd ibn Ali, the son of Imam Sajjad, about whom we're talking right now. So what happens with the Zaydis? The Zaydis, their main difference is that they believed, they created a theology or a principle for themselves in which someone can only become an Imam if they rise up militarily against their leader. Just like Imam al-Husayn. That's how they interpret it. But the truth is Imam Zayn did not rise until the very, very end of his life. In any case, that will lead to another day. So they came up with this theory, this principle, that an Imam can only be someone who leads, who rises against the injustice of their time militarily. If they don't, they can't be an Imam. So the problem is, they need to jump from Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam to, they don't recognize Imam al-Husayn. Okay, they don't. We'll talk about that. There's different groups of them, but generally they don't. So, they jump from Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam to Zayd. Zayd, the brother of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. He becomes their Imam, because Imam al-Baqir did not rise militarily. Okay, so they reject his imamah and they go to Zayd. But they need his father, because they still believe that the imamah is the descendants of the Holy Prophet, and the father of Zayd therefore needs to be an imam. And he did not revolt and he did not rise. So later in history, they attributed this thawra to Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. They said he was leading this military uprising, except that he was doing it in secret. Okay, this only appears after the 7th century. Okay? And is it true? No, absolutely not. Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, of his living, he kept saying that I have nothing to do with these military campaigns. And this continued, by the way, with the other Imams, where people would continuously come to the Imams asking them to lead military campaigns, and the Imams would completely disassociate themselves from those. And basically they're saying these are not the conditions for a military uprising. This is not what's needed in society, right? But those people are stubborn. And in some cases, the Imams, they pray for those people and they say that, may God have mercy upon them. They know that these people are rising with good intentions. And some of them were not rising with good intention. And so the Imams, in some cases, they say, I will never associate with such people. And in other cases, they say, so-and-so will be killed for nothing. So-and-so is never going to reach what they're aiming for. This is what they're doing is wrong. I can never bless their work. Okay? And this is where we have to distinguish between all of these different movements. So this is the context that I wanted to give. That's it. After that, we can, maybe one day we can talk a lot more about a lot of these uprisings and how to interpret them and the different kinds. But when we keep this in mind, we understand the constant pressure on all sides on Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. So on the one side, he's now living in Medina. He's back to Medina al-Munawwara under the rule of Bani Umayyad, who had just killed Imam Husayn alayhi salam in the tragedy of Karbala. And they continue with ruthless killing of anyone who is in the least showing any sympathy to what happened to Imam Husayn alayhi salam. And on the other side, there are these people who continuously come to the Imam, and same thing with Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, about whom we've talked extensively, that, why don't you lead these military campaigns? And if you don't, therefore, you are not an Imam. If you don't, therefore, how can you consider yourself to be a religious leader, a ruler, someone to be obeyed, and so on and so forth. And so we see the Imam between, and just as it happened with Imam al-Hasan, the closest of his companions, many of them left the Imam or insulted the Imam because they disagreed that he put a peace treaty in place between himself and Muawiyah. Right? So same thing was happening with Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. So with all of this said, I thought now that you have a little bit of a context so that it's not just an empty hadith, I thought I'd read this very quickly. So we're told there's a man by the name of, so this is Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, so Imam Sadiq alayhi salam is narrating this hadith. He says, Laqa Abbad al-Basri Ali ibn al-Husayn. So a man by the name of Abbad al-Basri, he met with Imam Ali ibn al-Husayn alayhi salam, Imam Sajjad, Zayn al-Abideen, fi tariqi Makkah. So obviously the Imam is going to perform the pilgrimage. On the way to Mecca, he encountered the Imam. He tells him, قال له يا علي بن الحسين تركت الجهاد وصعوبته وأقبلت على الحج ولينته. So you have left behind true struggling in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you have chosen instead to go perform the pilgrimage and its ease. Okay, so you've left behind the struggle in the way of God and its hardship, and you've chosen pilgrimage and its ease. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and he recited the ayah, إِنَّ اللَّهَ اشْتَرَى مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ أَنفُسَهُمْ وَأَمْوَالَهُمْ بِأَنَّ لَهُمُ الْجَنَّةِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bought from the believers their souls and their wealth in exchange for paradise, in exchange for heaven. أَنَّ لَهُمُ الْجَنَّةِ. And he recited the verse. So basically he's telling the Imam, the Qur'an says, this is what you should be doing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about this, and here you are, you want to perform the pilgrimage. There's an issue about who this person is. Okay? So it seems that it is not one of the Shia of them, but it's not sure. Because there is a man by the same name, and the scholars are not entirely in agreement on whether this is the same man who was a narrator at the time of Imam al-Sadiq or not. If he was, then he would have been. Otherwise, this is another man by the name of Abbad, and who was from Basra, Abbad al-Basri. So he recites the verse, إِنَّ اللَّهَ اشْتَرَى مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ أَنفُسَهُمْ بِأَنَّ لَهُمُ الْجَنَّةِ فَقَالَ لَهُ عَلِيُّ بْنُ الْحُسَيْنِ عَلَيْهِ السَّلَامُ. So this is verse 111 from Surah At-Tawbah, chapter 9. فقال له علي ibn al-Husayn alayhi salam, أتم الآية. So he read the ayah, he finished the ayah. The Imam said, continue to the next ayah. Okay? So Imam Sajjad alayhi salam says, أتم الآية. فقال. So the man knows the verse, so he recited. التائبون, al-Abideen, al-Hamidun. This is the next ayah. This is ayah 112 of Surah At-Tawbah. Okay, التائبون العابدون الحامدون السائحون الراكعون الساجدون الآمرون بالمعروف والناهون عن المنكر والحافظون لحدود الله وبشر المؤمنين. So التائبون, these, when the Quran uses this form, it basically means people that you recognize, and this is how they do it so much that you would attribute this trait to them. You would recognize them by this trait. So the Quran says, those who repent, the ta'ibun, those who worship, al-Abideen, al-Hamidun, those who are always celebrating the praise of Allah, al-Hamidun, as-Sa'ihun, so those who travel, those who wander or travel, most likely in the way of God. Okay? Al-Raki'un, as-Sajidun, those who bow down, those who prostrate. Al-Amiruna bil-Ma'ruf, wal-Nahuna 'anil munkar, those who enjoin good, those who forbid evil. وَالْحَافِظُونَ لِحُدُودِ اللَّهِ, those who observe, so for themselves, or the other definition of حافظون, those who protect the limits of Allah. وَبَشِّرِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, and give glad tidings to the believers. So the Imam tells him, continue, don't stop with the first verse that talks about, military excursions and expeditions. Continue. So the Imam reads this part. So this description, long description, of those who are mu'mineen, right? وَبَشِّرِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. فقال علي بن الحسين عليه السلام إذا رأينا هؤلاء الذين هذه صفتهم, when we will see those who have these traits, who carry these traits, فَالْجِهَادُ مَعَهُمْ أَفْضَلُ مِنَ الْحَجِّ, then the jihad that you're talking about, the struggle in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you speak of, would be better than performing the pilgrimage. Okay, so that's the hadith. So I thought, with this, now you have the hadith in mind, there's a lot we can take out of this hadith. So very quickly, I thought 3 points that I thought were very important. The first one, and I think this one applies to all of us, or the majority of us, is to be careful when we have a little bit of knowledge. That's why they always say a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. It's dangerous because you may not know what else you don't know. And so you want to base an entire thing on the little bit of knowledge that you may have. Maybe you've heard a saying. Maybe you've heard an actual hadith. It might be authentic or not, but let's say it's authentic. You know a verse of the Holy Quran. Does this mean that that's all there is to know about it, and therefore you can move into action? No. You have to see those who know, or those who know more. If you're not sure, go ask. Go get a formal education in this before you make these decisions, especially if you feel like there is something different that you want to do from the beaten path. If it's a beaten path and you trust the community, or you trust the scholars that you can see the majority of them are moving in that, or all of them are moving in a certain direction, okay, so that can give you enough of a trustworthiness in this direction. But if you want to do something and you clearly see that you're the minority and others are not moving in that direction, it doesn't mean that you're wrong. It does mean that you need to go make sure you have a full understanding, a full picture of what religion says. This man knew this verse, and when the Imam spoke to him, all he told him was, can you read the next verse? Why? Because the next verse is giving some conditions. And this man never understood the next verse as conditions. And the Imam explained it. You want to do this? Those conditions are met. When those conditions are met, I'll be the first. But those conditions are not met, which means this is not the most appropriate action to take right now. Okay? So the first point, and I think it has a lot to do with what you've been talking about, and for us in general in life, make sure that you have the full picture. Make sure you have enough knowledge about something before jumping into action. That's one. The second point is, I think it's very important in a lot of cases to recognize that especially in a big action like this. But a lot of this applies to our lives too. It could be daily lives, it could be big decisions in our lives. And the first point I was trying to emphasize on religious knowledge. Make sure you really understand what religion says before you move into action. In this second point, when the Imam says this is the time to move or not, it's because in every situation you're confronted with, there might be 10 or 15 or 30 or 200 different options and different actions that you could take. Your job is to try to find the most appropriate one. So what is the most appropriate one? How do you know? So what we talked about is the first step. You have to have a very good understanding of what religion tells you to do in such a context. But that's not enough. In the second step, you have to know that thing that you want to approach. What does it look like? Consider it like a file at work. Do you know that file inside out or no? If it's a matter of the world, let's say it's a political thing, like in this case. Let's say it's a socio-economic thing. Do you know enough about it? Or you only know that the Qur'an says. You only know the Hadith said. Good? So now you know what your duty is supposed to be in principle. But how do you approach this specific topic? What does it look like? Which means you have to go get expertise in this field. If you can't get the expertise yourself, go find the expertise from others. In today's world, it's very difficult to act in any significant way without having some understanding, for instance, of, let's say, how the IT world functions, how telecommunications work, the power of the internet and social media and what it means. If you have no knowledge of this, or if you want to have a truly good impact through these means, should you not go get the expertise there? If you want to talk about something, this is a great injustice because, well, have you understood where the great injustice is? Before I say this is a great injustice, do I know for sure who's going to benefit from what I'm going to say and who's going to be harmed by what I'm going to say? If I don't understand this, I need to go do research so that I don't cause more harm than good at the end. It might be good. Everybody agrees there's an injustice there. The question is, how do you deal with it? What's the most appropriate action to take at this time with this injustice? And it's not always unfortunately, to a lot of people, it's a knee-jerk reaction. You see something, you react. Okay, was it worth it? Either your reaction becomes insignificant. If it's, just to get likes and clicks, who cares? If it's to be seen that I posted something or that I went somewhere, that doesn't really accomplish anything. You want to measure it based on what did it change in the outside world, right? Otherwise, why are we talking about this? There has to be an effort, there has to be a cost put in, and there has to be a result. Have you measured the cost and have you measured the result? Are they worth it? Is it good or not? And this is what we have to learn from our Imams. That they never deal with things in a knee-jerk reaction. As much as they were criticized in their times by the closest of their companions, by all sorts of people, by military leaders, by scholars of their time, that they're behaving in the wrong way. The Imam is never looking at things superficially. Yeah, you might think that this is wrong, but what you're proposing is more wrong than this. It will cause even more harm than this. Or there's a better way to deal with this. Which is exactly what we have in the case of Imam Sajjad. Imam Sajjad, as we said, went through a very difficult time. Does it mean when the Imam says this that he's not going to take any action? That he doesn't struggle in the way of God? No. So how did he do it? And we've talked about this in the past, and inshallah we will have opportunities in the future to talk about this a lot more. Imam Sajjad lived at a time when the core of Islam, the spirit of Islam had been sucked out, had been killed, to the point where they are perfectly fine celebrating the death and the killing of Imam Husayn alayhi salam. He basically needs to bring back this society, the people, to the core, to the basics of Islam. But he can't sit on a pulpit and start teaching openly. He will be killed too. So he took a more indirect approach. And he focused on morals. He focused on morality and the things that we would consider, just basic right and wrong. But he took all of the teachings of Islam and he put them in the dua. Instead of preaching and openly talking to people and telling them this is right and this is wrong, he would sit and pray. And people would write the prayers. And he would pray publicly. He would take out his prayer mat and he would put it in the street. And he would get up and pray in the street so that people see. And remember, there's something called prayer. And we should pray. And he prays beautifully. And he prays for a long time. So this attracts people. And he worships and he prays and he does dua. And so they're written. And that becomes a Sahifa Sajjadiyya. So we should not look at it as just a compendium of prayers. This is a compendium of all of Islam, but he said it in the form of dua. Okay, so there is a way to struggle in the way of God. But this guy is a simpleton, or someone who is trying to instigate something. And the Imam doesn't fall for it. And the same thing with the Risalat al-Huquq. The Imam is bringing society back to basics. You want to do something? Go do something so that you reestablish justice. Do you know the rights of people? Your relationships with yourself, with your neighbors, with your family members, with your society. And then his conduct in general and how he conducted himself to the point where everybody referred to him as Zayn al-Abideen or Sayid al-Sajjadeen. Even people who were not followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. They would come, they would learn a hadith from him, and that's how they referred to him. Okay, so inshallah in the future we can talk a lot more about that. And the last point I wanted to make very quickly, we run out of time, is that the Imam is giving us, so in one way we can say this is just for argument's sake that the Imam is answering. I would say this is not for argument's sake. If Imam Husayn alayhi salam actually took to the sword and he decided to act in a different way, it's because the people that the verse is describing were with him. The same thing with the Holy Prophet. None of them would ever rise. Islam is against rising, is against using any type of force or violence, or unless you are absolutely forced to, you're put in a corner and it's in self-defense. This has to be very clear and very well established. But the Holy Prophet, Imam Ali alayhi salam, Imam Husayn alayhi salam, they were forced in that corner. And for those of you, I think you saw the actual wording, the quote from Imam Husayn alayhi salam, until the last second, when they would insult them. And some of the Imam Husayn's companions, they would get angry and they want to do something. He would tell them, no, I don't want to be the one starting. I will never start the fight. I will fight until the last minute to deal with this peacefully. But if there is action that an Imam wants to take, can he do it alone? Can Imam Sajjad change society alone? Can Imam al-Baqir change society alone? No. He needs companions. And Imam Sajjad is very clear here. He says, if you want me to act in society, find me those people because I don't see any of them. So basically, what you're doing is wrong. There's another way to deal with this that is much more appropriate now. Hence my Sahifa Sajjadiyya, hence my conduct. And if you want me to act in society, find me those people. So inshallah we keep this in mind in our relationship with Imam al-Mahdi. You want an Imam to act, you want an Imam to be able to do something, then you have to find that description. And go back and read it. Surah At-Tawbah, chapter 9, verse 112. Right? At-Ta'ibun, al-Abidun, الحامدون السائحون الراكعون الساجدون الآمرون بالمعروف والناهون عن المنكر والحافظون لحدود الله. And we have to use that as the template and assess ourselves. How many of these can I say I fit into? Am I ta'ibun, abidun, hamidun, raki'un, sajidun? Which one of these can I say I meet? So that I can say, yes, I'm one of those who are preparing the ground. So that when my Imam comes, he says, see, I have enough of them. Otherwise, that's the situation of our Imams. They have to keep taking another approach because there are no people helping them. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله